The summer of 1991 came heavy in the air over Opelika, Alabama, the kind of heat that hung thick over the pavement, where every sound felt stretched out and slow. On June 9th, the sun was already sinking low when Emily Ray Morton, a 26-year-old nurse's aide, left her apartment for what should have been a short drive across town. She was supposed to stop by her mother's house to drop off some groceries and check in on her little brother before heading to her night shift at the local care center. It was an ordinary Sunday, quiet except for the low murmur of cicadas and the smell of rain still clinging to the air from the storm earlier that day. But by Monday morning, Opelika would be wide awake with worry, and by the end of the week, the young woman's name would be printed on every newspaper across Lee County. Emily was the kind of person people remembered for her steadiness. She didn't chase attention, didn't gossip, didn't carry herself with drama. She wore her hair long, often pulled back with a simple clip, and had a way of smiling that made strangers feel seen. At the care home, she was known for staying past her shift just to keep lonely patients company. Her mother, Carolyn Morton, said later, Emily wasn't fancy, but she was good. She had this quiet goodness in her that everyone trusted. That trust made what happened next all the harder to understand. When Carolyn woke early on Monday morning and saw that Emily's car still wasn't parked outside, she tried to stay calm. Emily had worked long shifts before and sometimes caught a few hours of rest at a co-worker's apartment nearby. But when the care center confirmed she hadn't clocked in the night before, Carolyn's heart sank. By noon, she'd called the police. The responding officer, Deputy Alan Reeves, arrived to find Carolyn pacing the porch, twisting a dish towel in her hands. He took down Emily's description: 5'6", brown hair, blue eyes, last seen wearing a light denim jacket and sneakers, and assured Carolyn they'd put out a bolo. Be on the lookout. For the first day, there wasn't much to go on. Emily's 1984 Toyota Corolla was missing. So was her purse. Friends said she'd mentioned wanting to stop for gas on her way home that night, near the corner of Geneva Street and 8th Avenue, a quiet intersection that backed up to woods. Detectives canvassed the area, checked ditches, empty lots, and the road leading toward the old quarry. Nothing. No sign of the car. No sign of Emily. By the end of the week, the tone had shifted from worry to dread. Then, on the following Friday, June 14th, a call came in from a man who owned a small parcel of land off Highway 280. He'd been mowing near the tree line when he noticed something glinting beneath the brush, the roof of a car, half hidden and streaked with dirt. When deputies arrived, the Toyota was there, the driver's door cracked open. The key still hung in the ignition. Inside, the seatbelt was buckled, and a single grocery bag lay on the passenger seat, the milk long spoiled. 50 yards away through a thicket of pine, they found Emily's body. The coroner's report later listed cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head, with evidence suggesting a struggle. Her wrists bore faint bruises, defensive marks. The ground around her showed signs she'd tried to fight. The scene broke even the most seasoned investigators. Detective John Tanner, who led the early investigation, said years later, "You could tell right away she didn't go down easy. Whoever did this, it was personal. It wasn't random." Within days, the Opelika Police Department launched one of its largest investigations in years. They interviewed co-workers, neighbors, old friends, even former classmates. They traced Emily's last phone calls, checked the local gas stations, and pulled security footage from the few places that had cameras. Though in 1991, most didn't. The leads came fast at first, then fizzled. One man said he'd seen Emily's car parked near the edge of town late that Sunday night, but he couldn't be sure of the exact time. Another woman claimed she'd noticed a light-colored pickup truck idling nearby. Police followed both tips, but each led nowhere. Then came whispers about a man Emily had once dated briefly the year before. His name was Terry Maddox, a construction worker who'd moved to Columbus, Georgia after the breakup. He was older than Emily by nearly 10 years, known to have a temper when he drank. When detectives reached him, he denied any involvement. He said he'd been working a roofing job in Phoenix City the weekend she vanished. The alibi checked out. Still, something about his name lingered. The case stretched on through the long, humid summer, every week marked by another headline, another false hope. People began locking their doors earlier, turning down side roads more cautiously. Opelika was a small place then, the kind of town where everyone knew someone who knew you. The idea that a killer might be living among them changed the way people looked at one another. By September, the police had little left to follow. They sent trace evidence, hair strands, fibers, and swabs from beneath Emily's fingernails, to the state crime lab in Montgomery. But the lab's capacity in the early 90s was limited. The technology that would one day make DNA a household term was still in its infancy. When the results came back inconclusive, the lead detective made the hardest call of his career. The case would go cold. Carolyn never accepted that. Every year on the anniversary of Emily's disappearance, she wrote a letter to the department, asking if there was anything new. Most times she got a polite reply. No new leads at this time. She started keeping a notebook and a simple, spiral-bound pad filled with names, newspaper clippings, and scribbled phone numbers of anyone who said they'd seen something unusual that night. Her younger son, Danny, remembered how she'd sit at the kitchen table long after midnight, the overhead light yellow on her face flipping through those pages. She didn't sleep much after that, he said years later. I think a part of her was afraid she'd forget something important. Like if she stopped thinking about it, the truth would disappear with her. For most of the 1990s, the case file gathered dust. A few detectives cycled through it over the years, hoping to make progress, but the evidence wasn't enough. In the early 2000s, as DNA testing became more advanced, a cold case review was briefly proposed. But budget cuts hit the county hard and the idea was shelved. By 2010, the file was moved to a storage unit behind the department, a metal cabinet filled with aging manila folders and fading Polaroids. Time didn't erase the memory, though local residents still remembered the story, especially the younger nurses who worked at the care center where Emily once clocked in. They kept her name on a small plaque in the break room, a quiet reminder of the woman who'd stayed late when others went home. Then, in 2023, everything changed. Detective Laura Hastings, a new addition to the Opelika Police Department, had joined the force with a reputation for persistence. She'd grown up in Montgomery, studied forensic science, and believed deeply in the power of cold case work. When she stumbled upon Emily Morton's file during an evidence audit, she asked a simple question. Why hasn't this been retested with modern methods? The sergeant shrugged. Never had the budget. And the old samples might not even hold up. Hastings requested permission to check anyway. She spent weeks sorting through boxes in the evidence room until she found the sealed envelopes from 1991. The fingernail scrapings, the fabric cuttings, the swabs that had survived decades of Alabama humidity, thanks to careful storage. She knew she might only have one chance. In July 2023, she submitted them to the State Forensics Lab, now equipped with next-generation DNA sequencing. Technology, the kind capable of extracting genetic material from fragments too small to analyze. 30 years ago, the results came back 3 months later. What they revealed would rewrite the story that had haunted Opelika for more than 3 decades. The sample recovered from beneath Emily's fingernails, the one preserved by a young technician back when DNA was still experimental, had produced a viable male profile. And when it was entered into the national database, no immediate match appeared. But Hastings wasn't done. She reached out to the state's genealogical research unit, a small team that specialized in familial DNA tracing, a method that compared the unknown sample to public genetic databases to find distant relatives. It took months of triangulation and tree building. Then, in early 2024, a hit appeared. A second cousin once removed living in northern Florida. From there, the web tightened, piece by piece. The genealogist traced the family line back to a man who had once lived in Opelika, Terry Maddox, the same man police had interviewed in 1991, the one who'd moved away soon after Emily's death. The genealogical link was strong, statistically significant, enough to warrant a direct comparison. A warrant was issued quietly for a DNA sample. Detectives tracked Maddox to a small trailer park outside Pensacola, where he worked odd construction jobs under his own name. When they collected a discarded coffee cup from a local gas station trash bin and tested it, the result came back with a 99.999% match to the sample found on Emily's body. 33 years after the crime, the truth had finally surfaced. When the arrest warrant was signed, Opelika's police chief stood at the back of the room, eyes glassy with disbelief. "After all this time," he said softly, "she finally gets her justice." That afternoon, a team of Alabama and Florida officers surrounded the trailer where Maddox lived. He stepped out onto the porch in a sweat-stained shirt, confused at first, then silent as he realized what the badge in front of him meant. The officer's words were calm, practiced. "Terry Wayne Maddox, you're under arrest for the 1991 murder of Emily Ray Morton." Neighbors gathered behind the police tape, whispering as they watched him taken away. Some had known him for years, never guessing what he carried. When the news broke, Opelika froze. For an entire generation who'd grown up hearing the story, the name Emily Morton had been a wound that never fully healed. Now at last the first real step toward peace had come, and somewhere, in a quiet kitchen on the edge of town, an old spiral notebook sat on a table, its final page blank, waiting for an ending. When the call came in confirming the DNA match, Detective Laura Hastings didn't move for a full minute. She just stared at the printout in her hand. The statistical certainty printed in black ink, the decades-old case number scrawled across the top. It was like holding a ghost that had finally taken shape. For 33 years, the name Emily Ray Morton had lingered in police files and family prayers, frozen in time. Now the circle had closed. The same man who'd slipped away under the shadow of doubt in 1991 had finally been pulled back into the light. The arrest made headlines by Nightfall. Opelika cold case cracked after 33 years. Suspect arrested in Florida. The photo showed Terry Maddox being led from his trailer, head lowered, face drawn and weathered by time. He was 64 now, a man whose years had etched deep lines around his mouth and eyes, whose hands trembled slightly as the cuffs clicked shut. When Detective Hastings saw the footage replayed on the evening news, she felt both satisfaction and a strange hollow ache. Solving a cold case wasn't triumph. It was restoration. It didn't bring anyone back. It just set the record straight. That night, she drove past the old care center where Emily had once worked. The building was still there, though it had changed owners 3 times since 1991. The parking lot light flickered faintly. She parked and sat for a long while, imagining the young woman walking out the doors one last time. Tired, kind, unaware of the darkness waiting at the edge of the road. Inside her car, Hastings whispered, "We got him, Emily, we finally got him." The next morning, Maddox was transported from Florida to the Lee County Detention Center in Alabama. The extradition paperwork took hours, but by early evening, he was back in the same state where everything had started. The interrogation room was small, pale gray walls, a single table, 2 chairs, and a digital recorder humming quietly in the background. Maddox sat across from Hastings, his wrists chained loosely in front of him, his gaze avoiding hers. His hair was thinner now, the once broad shoulders slightly hunched, but there was still something defiant in his posture. The way he leaned back, jaw clenched, as if daring her to try. Hastings placed a manila folder on the table. She didn't open it right away. "You remember Emily Morton?" she asked softly. He gave a small shrug. "Name sounds familiar. You dated her." 1990 into early 91. Broke up a few months before she died. He nodded slightly. "If you say so. Long time ago." Hastings flipped open the folder. Inside were photos. Not graphic ones, but the evidence markers. The old Polaroids from the scene. He didn't look at them. "You moved to Columbus right after her death," she continued. "Started a new job the same week her funeral was held. You told police back then you were working that weekend. We checked your alibi again. That foreman you said vouched for you. He never signed your timesheet for June 9th. Said you called in sick." Maddox shifted in his seat, his fingers tightening slightly. "I don't remember what I did that weekend. It's been 30 years. Maybe this will help," she said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. "The DNA report. Simple and irrefutable. We found your DNA under her fingernails. You fought with her, Terry. She scratched you when she tried to get away. For the first time..." His eyes flicked toward hers, something flickering in them. Fear, disbelief. "Maybe both. That's impossible," he said quietly. "You people must have contaminated it." "There's no way." "We tested it twice," Hastings replied. "There's no mistake." Silence stretched across the room. The hum of the fluorescent light above them filled the air. Finally he exhaled and muttered, "She was the one who wouldn't let go." Hastings felt a cold pulse in her chest. "What do you mean?" He looked at the table. "She was going to ruin my life. She told people things that weren't true. I just wanted her to stop." His voice was flat, detached, not defensive, not remorseful. "Just empty." Hastings leaned forward slightly. "So you met her that night?" He didn't answer. "Did you hit her?" Still nothing. His fingers tapped lightly on the tabletop. The rhythm of a man who knew that silence was his only weapon left. When the interview ended, Hastings left the room quietly, the door closing behind her with a dull click. She stood in the hallway for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. The confession wasn't full, but it was enough. A glimpse of truth after decades of denial. The DA's office moved quickly. Within a week, Maddox was formally charged with murder in the first degree. Prosecutors decided against pursuing the death penalty. The goal wasn't vengeance, but accountability. His trial would proceed in Lee County Circuit Court, the same jurisdiction that had once failed to find him. When the news reached Carolyn Morton, Emily's mother, she was sitting on her porch, a thin blanket across her lap. She was 78 now, her health fragile, her movements slow. Danny, her son, sat beside her, holding the letter that had arrived by certified mail. "They found him, Mama," he said softly. "They arrested him." She blinked slowly, her eyes glassy. "After all this time," he nodded. "It was his DNA. They proved it." She didn't speak for a long time. The cicadas buzzed in the trees, the air heavy with the smell of magnolia. Finally she whispered, "I told you she didn't go with no stranger. She knew him." Tears filled her eyes then, not of relief exactly, but of release. "My baby fought. She left her mark on him. God bless her for that." Word of the arrest rippled through Opelika. People who had been teenagers in 1991, now in their 50s, stopped one another in grocery stores and whispered, "Did you hear? They got him." For some, it reopened wounds. For others, it was a long-delayed vindication. Reporters returned to town, setting up cameras outside the courthouse steps. The police department held a small press conference, where Detective Hastings stood at the podium beside the chief. "This case," she said, "was solved because someone 30 years ago believed evidence mattered, even when we didn't have the tools to use it. We don't throw away hope here. We preserve it." When she stepped down, an older man approached her quietly, retired Detective John Tanner, the original investigator. He was stooped now, his badge long retired, but his eyes carried the same spark. "You did good, Detective," he said. "You finished what we couldn't." Hastings smiled softly. "You kept the evidence clean all those years. That's what made it possible, he chuckled. Sometimes doing your job right just means not giving up. As the trial date approached, the DA's office began reconstructing the timeline, a monumental task after so many years. They tracked down old witnesses, now scattered across the South. They interviewed Emily's former co-workers, some now grandmothers, some retired, each remembering her in small, tender details, her laughter, her kindness, the way she carried extra snacks for the patients who didn't get many visitors. In early March 2024, jury selection began. The courtroom was packed. Reporters along the back wall, local families filling the benches. Carolyn Morton attended every session, a soft blue scarf around her shoulders, the same one Emily had given her the Christmas before she died. When Maddox entered the courtroom for the first time, he didn't look up. He wore a county-issued jumpsuit, his hair gray, his gait stiff. The years had stripped him of the menace he once carried, but not of the chill that trailed behind his presence. The prosecution began with quiet precision. They walked the jury through the forensic journey, how technology that didn't exist in 1991 had resurrected the truth in 2023. The crime lab's experts explained the chain of custody, showing how the sample beneath Emily's nails had been sealed and preserved, untouched and uncorrupted. When Detective Hastings took the stand, she spoke calmly, her voice steady. The DNA found on the victim's body matched the defendant's profile at a probability exceeding 1 in 10 trillion. There is no scientific doubt. The defense tried to argue contamination, pointing to the decades between the crime and testing. But the evidence had been too well preserved. Every seal, every signature, every timestamp told a story of integrity. It wasn't luck. It was diligence. Midway through the trial, a former co-worker of Emily's testified that she'd overheard an argument between Emily and Maddox just weeks before her death. Emily had told her, "He won't stop calling me. He keeps saying I owe him something." That sentence hung in the courtroom air like smoke. When Carolyn took the stand near the end, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Her voice was frail but unbroken. She was a good girl, she said softly. She wanted to help people. And when she didn't come home that night, I knew something terrible had happened. I prayed for 30 years that I'd live long enough to see this day. Her eyes drifted toward Maddox. You took her from us. But you didn't take her voice. She told you no, and she told us who did it. Maddox didn't raise his head. When closing arguments began, the prosecutor's voice trembled with conviction. Justice doesn't expire, he said. It waits. It waited 33 years for this moment, for truth to finally have a name. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman's words came steady and clear. We find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree. A gasp rippled through the room. Carolyn bowed her head, her son's arm around her shoulders. Detective Hastings closed her eyes for a moment, a quiet tear tracing her cheek. It wasn't joy, it was gravity, the weight of all the years that had led to this moment. Maddox stood silent as the verdict was read, expression blank. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. There was no outburst, no remorse, just the sound of chains as the deputies led him away. Outside the courthouse, the sky was overcast, the air heavy with humidity. Reporters shouted questions. The family gave none. Carolyn simply said, "We waited a long time." God finally answered. That night back at the police station, Hastings walked through the evidence room one last time. The boxes were neatly stacked, labeled, catalogued, the ghosts of other stories waiting their turn. She paused at the one marked Morton, ER 1991, running her hand over the faded ink. "Rest now," she whispered. Then she turned off the light and left the room in silence. The morning after the verdict, the town of Opelika woke to a quiet kind of peace, not celebration. That wasn't the right word, but a stillness that hadn't existed in decades. For the first time in 33 years, there was no uncertainty hanging in the air, no rumor or speculation circling the old case. that had haunted so many lives. At Morton's Grocery, the small corner store that Emily's uncle still owned, people came by just to talk. The register bell chimed over and over as customers stopped for coffee and shared the same thought. It's finally over. Some remembered where they were the morning Emily was found. Some remembered her laughter, her soft-spoken kindness. For many, she had been a symbol of the town's innocence, the moment before everything changed. Justice took its time, said one old man, adjusting his cap as he paid for his paper, but I guess it found the road home. At the First Baptist Church, the Sunday service that week was unusually full. Pastor Riley devoted the sermon to endurance, to faith in dark places. Near the end, he said something that stayed with everyone who heard it. Evil hides for a season, but time belongs to truth, and truth always comes walking back. Down the third pew, Carolyn Morton sat with her son Danny, holding her daughter's photo in her lap. The corners were soft from years of being touched. After the service, several people came up to hug her, some she hadn't seen in decades. She thanked each one, her eyes misty but clear. "I prayed God would let me see this day," she said. "Now I can rest when he calls me." Across town, Detective Hastings was sitting in her office, a small cup of black coffee untouched beside her. The adrenaline from the trial had faded, replaced by a calm weariness, the kind that comes after finishing something you've carried too long. On her desk was a single envelope from the district attorney's office. People vs. Maddox. Case closed. She turned it over in her hands, then tucked it into the file cabinet. The drawer shut with a quiet click. For most of her career, Hastings had chased living suspects, cases where the evidence was fresh, the grief recent. But this one was different. It had stretched across generations, outlasting officers, judges, even witnesses. It had reminded her that justice wasn't always swift, but it was patient. That afternoon she visited the Oakwood Cemetery, where Emily was buried under a willow tree near the back. The headstone was simple: beloved daughter and sister. In 1968-1991, someone had placed fresh magnolias there, probably her mother. The ground was soft from recent rain. Hastings crouched, brushed a few leaves away and whispered, "We kept our promise." A few rows away, an elderly man stood silently with a cane, John Tanner, the retired detective who'd first worked the case in '91. She hadn't expected him there. He smiled faintly when he saw her. "You beat me to it," he said. "She deserved someone to tell her," Hastings replied. He nodded, eyes on the grave. "She was just a girl trying to live her life. I never forgot her. Every time I opened a new case, I thought of this one." They stood together for a long time, saying nothing. The air smelled faintly of wet grass and earth, the wind rustling through the willow's long branches. Before leaving, Tanner said softly, "You know, Laura, every cold case we keep alive is a prayer in motion. It just takes time for God to answer." She smiled. He did. In the weeks that followed, the story spread far beyond Alabama. National outlets picked it up. The idea that a 1991 murder had finally been solved in 2024 struck a chord. Headlines called it a testament to persistence. Others focused on how new DNA methods, paired with careful evidence preservation, had rewritten the ending of a forgotten tragedy. The Lee County Sheriff's Office received letters from all over the country, some from families of other cold cases, thanking them for proving that justice could still come, no matter how long it took. The sheriff forwarded one of those letters to Detective Hastings. It was from a woman in Georgia whose sister had gone missing in 1987. It said simply, "I don't know if our case will ever be solved, but your work gave me hope. Thank you for showing me that time doesn't erase truth." Hastings pinned it to her bulletin board. Meanwhile, Maddox began serving his sentence at the William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison outside Bessemer. He was placed in the general population, but kept mostly to himself. A local reporter requested an interview, but he declined.